Hi, today I want to talk briefly about the blue zones, those small areas in the inland parts of Sardinia, Costa Rica, and parts of Greece, and formerly parts of Okinawa. They have been defined in the last 20 to 30 years as places where there are a disproportionate number of centenarians, people who live to be 100. Some of the science of these studies has been called into question by some scientists, and yet I think that when I've read through everything that I've learned about the blue zones, there is still plenty of useful information in there that we can still take to heart that resonates with all the other science and all the research that's going on about health and longevity and wellness. So while we may not necessarily agree with the sources of, the blue zones specifically, I think it is important and worthwhile to check out some of the summaries of information that the author Dan Buettner puts together when he is writing about these ideas and what ties it all together. So, what are the characteristics of these places? What are the choices and the lifestyles and the environment and the food and all these things that lead people to have a good long life in these places. So no matter what, I think it's still relevant, and I wanted to share some of that with you today because many of us are on a quest to be well, to be better, and especially right now, we have a great need for, stress relief and resilience and health and good food and all these things in community, right? So I think it's very relevant. So there's a list called the Power 9, which are some of the techniques for longevity and a good life that they talk about in the Blue Zones documentation. And the first one is to move naturally, meaning to do low-impact exercise throughout your day, meaning that could be just taking a walk. It could mean gardening. It could mean getting up and dancing, using a standing desk instead of sitting, bicycling when you can, walking to errands, and things like that. 2 is purpose. So, why you wake up in the morning. That's a really important part of this because of all the communities that they studied, having a purpose. In Costa Rica, they call it plan de vida. In Okinawa, they called it ikigai, which is like one's purpose for living, one's mission in life. And it's always ranks pretty high. And I think we can all agree that if we have a purpose and a feeling of doing something that matters, we're probably going to feel better in our life. So 3 is to be able to downshift, having routines to shed stress. So that could be a brief nap in the afternoon. Maybe that's not possible for you because you're at your job. But there are lots of ways that we can shed stress and lots of different techniques that are well known. Trying to build some of them into your daily routine will be very positive for you no matter what. Part 4 is the 80% rule, eating till you're not quite full, eating 80% of the food that's on your plate. And he always talks about having smaller dinner plates too, and that can help us to not overeat. Number 5 is plant slant, eating minimally processed plant-based foods. And in the studies that they did, they found that some people had 100% plant-based diets, and then others had some fish up to 3 times a week, but small quantities. And they often ate the kind of fish that were lower on the food chain so that the people were less likely to ingest like heavy metals. And, when you think about tuna and all the problems with mercury because it's a giant fish, so it's taken in a lot of other fish. So the higher on the food chain it is, you may want to minimize your intake of that kind of fish and instead think of sardines and anchovies and smaller fish that you can chop up and put into pasta or something like that. This one has been controversial because some of the studies show this to be beneficial and some not. So I am not a medical professional, and neither is the person who wrote the Blue Zones book, so I want to preface that. But number 6 is wine at 5. He's talking about how in many traditional cultures, they do drink a small amount of wine almost daily. And usually it's what they make at home from their own grapes in their own community. And Cananao wine in Sardinia is supposed to have more flavonoids and beneficial compounds in it than others because of the type of grape and the environment of the soil and all these things. Again, I'm not a scientist, but it's an interesting thing that I have heard talked about in a number of different angles relating to wellness. So for some of us, drinking any wine is problematic, and for some of us, having a little bit is okay. So I think that's the kind of thing that has to be done with your personal judgment and talking to your doctor about your health. The seventh one is belong. Having a faith community, having a community to belong to of other people who share your values in some way. An example for me is that we're members of the Italian Cultural Center here in Buffalo, the Centro Culturale Italiano di Buffalo. And in that group, it's really nice because you can go speak the language and practice with others. You can share your love of the place, of Italy in general, of specific communities. You can talk about what it's like to do your ancestral research or go to your ancestral hometown. So we all have a shared interest in Italy and the Italian language and culture. So it's nice to be a part of something like that. It has really been wonderful for us, and I encourage you to find something like that. The eighth one is loved ones first. So a common trait between a lot of these Blue Zone communities that they've identified is that the family is very tight. Intergenerational groups stick together. There are not many nursing home type places. And a lot of this is because these are isolated communities that have not even had the opportunity to build places like that. So it's not necessarily that they don't send them to nursing homes, it's that the nursing homes don't exist. And so what happens is there's a reliance in the community on each other that has to happen. That's how it has to be. And because in the States we have other systems in place, it's possible to have the option to send a loved one who's elderly to a facility, whereas that's just not in place in certain isolated small communities that still are very traditional. So that it's some of the things that don't get said in terms of like, hey, here are all the benefits of these traditional communities. Some of it is because there's poverty there, or there is a lack of availability of those types of things, and therefore people are staying in their home and being observed by many different family caregivers throughout a given day or week. The other thing that they don't talk about, they do talk about a little bit, but like the walkability and the density of villages and communities makes a difference in terms of how many people can pop in and check in on you. Like if you're in a walkable community in a village in the inland part of Sardinia, all your relatives live within like a 3-mile radius of you, and they can walk to your house very easily. And so that's going to make it easier for people to stop in and check in on you and see how you're doing and, things like that, take turns with the caretaking. In our far-flung, spread-out American cultures, this does not sound very practical because we don't live that way. So I think we have to take some of this with a grain of salt and try to think about how we can adjust and adapt these ideas for our way of living here in the States and/or all move to walkable communities. And even I have to say, when I look out at my North Buffalo neighborhood where I live, there's not a ton of density. These are single-family homes or apartment homes that have space between them. I mean, it's not like an Italian village where everything is like right up against each other. So it creates longer distances to walk between things, to get to a store, things like that. So that's something that I'm always going to be talking about is the difference. And the ninth one is right tribe, meaning building a social circle around yourself, having a network of other people who do something that you care about, like you're all volunteering together, or you're a part of like a mutual aid group, or, you're doing things and you're collecting your friends around you and sort of having mutual support. And that is one of the most important things in terms of how we feel. Do we have an outlet? Do we have people around us that we can talk to when we really are having a hard time? Do we have financial support from a network of friends or family? Those are really important things in terms of longevity, not just for the caretaking that I was talking about, but in terms of our mental state and how we might have people that we can go to when we have a particular problem or issue or fear, or, something happens and we really need to talk to somebody. Now, again, in the US, we're so separated, even sometimes from our friends, that, that role ends up falling to professionals. We have counselors and therapists, and a lot of the time we do see our friends and we might talk to them about what's going on in our lives or vent about our problems. But we've also kind of privatized it to some extent. It's not necessarily something that we expect to take on as friends in a big way. Like, it's once in a while. It's when you're having a real crisis, something like that. But it was just very interesting to me in reading this book, which is called Blue Zones. Oh, I can't remember the full name of the book, but it's by Dan Buettner, Buettner, Secrets to a Long Life, I think it's called. And, so he, in the end of the book, talks about kind of how to set up your home, how to set up your kitchen, your bedroom, all these different places to have a more optimal experience and to have better health and wellness. So he goes through and talks about, eating that plant-based diet and how to make it a little easier for yourself to cook that way. He talks about reducing electronics in the bedroom and lowering the stress levels and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of interesting ideas that are brought up in this book. And as I am about to lead a group retreat in Sardinia next month, we'll be talking about the blue zones. We'll be talking about all of the benefits of these traditional ways of life. And I also want to be talking with them about the challenges that we have as an American society of bringing some of these ideas into our culture, which we have in many ways lost. And the fact that, unfortunately, American processed and hurried food culture is infiltrating every part of the globe and is creating issues. And those blue zones are shrinking because it's easier and easier to access junk food and fast food, and to, you have technology, you can move far away from your family. And this is what has happened and played out in the US. So it becomes a very difficult thing to maintain long term. But I think that with some of these ideas, we can bring into our lives a little bit more balance and better health overall. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and take on this. And I'll be back next Tuesday with more tips for a good life. Thanks.